Hi, I'm Corey Morgan.
And I'm Christopher.
And we're here to discuss REDLINE Tactical Card Combat.
Corey, could you tell me a little bit more about the game from your experience?
Sure. REDLINE is it's a game produced by Saving Throw Studios. It's a mech game. If you like mechs, you'll love this game. Saving Throw Studios, they describe REDLINE as if BattleTech and Magic the Gathering had a baby, and I cannot think of a more apt description. If you've played games like Magic, you would feel right at home with a lot of the mechanics of this game. It shares a lot of similarities to games like that, with sufficient differences to definitely be its own animal. Okay, it is very, very different in a lot of ways as well. Thematically, again, it's very, very similar to what you see in BattleTech, games of that ilk. Okay, it's really thematic. The idea behind REDLINE, the designer of the game came up with a really cool backstory for it. You can get tidbits of the backstory on the website, as well as, of course, reading the cards. And the idea behind it is, it's in the future, of course, and there was a war that ultimately resulted in Russia and China having to relocate to Mars. Okay.
Oh, wow.
They're kind of on the losing end there. So they end up relocating to Mars. Mars is colonized, obviously, at that point. However, the war is continuing, and you now have the United Nations of Earth and the Crimson Pact of Mars, okay, are the two main factions in REDLINE currently. So, and yeah, it's a game of warfare between the two. It's on a skirmish level, or squad-based level, rather. So what's happening is it's all card-based, all right, and you're both leading squads of mechs, battling over various battlefields.
So it was, you mentioned it's kind of the political conflict going on, and to me that can add a lot of flavor to games. It reminds me almost of like what's going on in BattleTech. We're sort of stuck in almost like an 80s aesthetic, and in terms of like the Cold War going on, the level of technology is advanced, but not necessarily like where we are with the internet. It kind of doesn't exist in like the old BattleTech. So it's a very like kind of personal thing with the person inside the mech. It can be the focus, and that we have the Cold War kind of politics going on, where you said Russia and China have to relocate to Mars. So that's pretty interesting that it has it like that. And so we've got some product here, and it looks like these aren't random packs like they might have for Magic. It looks like pre-constructed sets, which I think is a nice touch to have. So you're not, it's not pay to win.
That's accurate, and I'll tell you, that's one point you bring up there, a good point there, that they are in pre-constructed decks. I have played with most of these, and they are playable right out of the decks. They are competitive with each other right out of the decks, which is one thing that's great about it. There's no randomness on these. You know what you're getting when you buy it. And each of these decks has a certain theme behind it too. So for example, here we have the core set. Okay. Oh, and by the way, they do make these really cool little minis for it. They don't have a gameplay function actually. It's swag, is what it is. It's swag, but it is really cool. All right. If you're a mech head, which I know you are, okay, as am I, they're just really cool. But so we have the core set, which, in the rulebook, they give you a bit of the backstory about the war going on between the Crimson Pact of Mars and the United Nations of Earth. Okay. Each expansion, we have the Siege expansion here and the Battle of Neom expansion here. They each have their own little stories behind it as well. You mentioned in BattleTech the focus on characters within the mechs. That is definitely a thing here too. The stories are individual. So, for example, in the Battle for Neom here, this set describes an invasion from the Crimson Pact of Mars into the city of Neom. The invasion is led by General Dmitry Koskov, which, by the way, each deck has a general that has a unique ability that affects how that deck is going to operate. Okay. Now, the Crimson Pact of Mars deck here, led by Dmitry Koskov, he's a nutbag. All right. He is we're going to take this city by any means necessary, even if it means scorched earth, destroying the city. This set has mechanics that can result in the destruction of the city.
Oh, wow.
Okay? Dmitry Koskov is perfectly fine with sacrificing all of his people. He does not care who dies in the process. Again, any means necessary. So this deck also features a mechanic where a mechanic called casualty, where as your units, any of your units getting destroyed, many of them have a certain bonus that you gain when they get destroyed. So it features in really well with the theme of Dmitry sending soldiers out to their death, you know, razing the city to the ground just to make sure they can take it from the UNE. Again, any means necessary. So the story really comes alive in these cards. The flavor text is wonderful. They, again, in the rulebook, they give a bit of the background of the story. The designer really came up with a really compelling world for this. It's absolutely fantastic.
That sounds interesting. So the decks have like a commander type function. So there's a leader who kind of like influences like how you're going to run your deck or what cards might be in it. And so that sounds pretty interesting. Can you also like put different pilots in the different mechs? Because to me that really humanizes the story and adds a nice level of customization.
So that's an question. You can put pilots in the deck. Yes, you can. So the in this game they're referred to as Efreets. Okay, and there's story lore behind that, behind why they're called Efreets. But so Efreets can be modified. You have cards representing your Efreets, of course. There are other cards, known as equipment cards, that you can then use to modify the Efreets, give them additional weaponry, etc. So depending on what you draw, there is some degree of customization of your Efreets. Among those also are pilot cards. Okay, and you can place pilots in Efreets, which will modify the performance of that Efreet in some way. So there are some generic pilots on there, like they have a UNE, United Nations Earth. UNE Cadet is one of the pilots. That's rather generic. But most of the pilots are unique. They have specific names. And there are some cards that reference unique Efreets. That is an Efreet that is piloted by this specific pilot. Which is really kind of cool. Again, it's more of a lore thing. Now, mechanically, they don't constrain you because you may have this pilot is meant to go with this Efreet, but really you can put any pilot on this Efreet. You can put this pilot on any Efreet. It's just kind of cool if you put them together.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that sounds interesting. Are there different like classes of mechs? Like, you know, BattleTech had light, medium, heavy, assault. And those added a lot of tactical play. Like, you know, you could try and have 5 Locusts gang up on a Atlas or something, and each player would have very different types of strategies for, you know, that game. Like the small type of mechs would kind of, you know, run around the bigger ones and try and, you know, you'd be using line of sight to your advantage. So are there different weight classes in this game? There are
light, medium, and heavy Efreets. There's no assault class Efreet. They're strictly divided into light, medium, and heavy. So I mentioned again that it can be described as BattleTech / Magic having a baby. Okay, and one of the similarities to Magic is it's a similar resource generation mechanic in that you're drawing cards. You can play 1 resource per round, and these resources are used to play cards from your hand. Heavy Efreets are generally much more expensive than light Efreets. So light Efreets, you can get them out very quickly, whereas heavy Efreets, they tend to have more armor, heavier firepower, but you're not going to see those until much later in the game. So, and by that point, the light Efreets hopefully have gotten you know, or it may have gotten your opponent a good lead that you now have to compensate for. So yeah, they do have different weight classes like that, and they do function very differently.
What's the goal? Are we going after like kind of life points? Are you trying to rack up other types of points, or is something else going on?
Good question. Good question. There's actually there's 2 ways to win Redline. One of them is the main method is, and this is one thing that really sets it apart from other card games of its ilk. You have, if you and I were playing the game, we would have in between us 5 mission cards, okay? And what these missions are, they're locations we're going to be fighting over. what'll happen is each turn we're going to send our Efreets to various ones of those missions, and we're going to have opposed battles at those missions. Now, let's say at one of these missions, you and I have some Efreets, and I managed to destroy all of yours, and I have some remaining, okay? I can then try and take that mission, all right? If I take control of that mission, okay, great, I've got control of that mission. Maybe you've got control of this other mission, etc. So the goal of the game is to control all 5 missions. If you control all 5 missions, you have achieved a tactical victory, all right? And that's the main way to win the game. But, and I'm a big fan of alternate win conditions. They do have an alternate win condition. Your deck is your arsenal. If you can deplete your opponent's arsenal, you win the game, okay?
That's interesting.
So you are drawing cards every turn, so if you do run out, you're going to lose the game. There is one of the decks in Siege has a lot of things that target your opponent's arsenal, okay? And if you target your opponent's arsenal, you can cause them to discard cards. It's a mill deck, okay? One of those decks can function pretty well as a mill deck. It's not, I have found playing against it, unlike a really devoted, focused mill deck, this one's not frustrating to play against, okay? It just makes you feel like you're under a clock, but you can still play the game.
Oh, that sounds interesting. So there's like a tactical layer, and then there's like what we might think of as like a magic type of like hand and deck manipulation going on can potentially happen. So you can play on several different levels.
Yeah, deck manipulation, yes. I have to date so far, based on all these sets of everything that's been released so far, there's not anything any kind of hand manipulation, which I'm frankly glad of, because I find making your opponents discard cards from their hand can result in your opponent being unable to play the game, and that's never fun for anyone. I prefer games where I can enjoy losing as well. Yeah. All right, I can still play the game, and that's certainly the case with REDLINE as well.
Okay, so we've seen there's a couple different products here. Can you mix them and customize the decks?
Oh, sure.
Or do you have to keep it, what comes in the box?
Good point. Yeah, absolutely, it is customizable. So yes, these are all playable right outside of the box, and I could take this deck from Siege and this deck from Neom and play them against each other, and they're going to be competitive against each other. Okay. However, yes, you can absolutely customize your own deck as well, just like any card game of this type, certainly.
And are there like strict deck construction rules? Like, do you have to have a certain type of X card and certain types of things, or can you just throw it together however you want?
Okay, there is a limit of 3 cards, 3 of any given card in a deck, except for basic resources. So basic resources, you can have any number of. It's not collectible. Okay, it's not collectible. Like I said, these decks are pre-constructed, so you know what you get when you're buying it. So there's no Mr. Suitcase in it.
Yeah.
Right.
One thing that I find really attractive about this game and mech games in general is, the giant robot aspect of it, and it really kind of brings me back to my childhood. After school, coming home and watching Robotech, which I found most mech heads, that's a common thread. That just it was such as it captured the culture and a moment in time and technology in the 80s. So I really like the mech part of it, and this is all card based. Do we need anything else to play? Does it come self-contained with everything?
So the core set comes with everything you need. There are components other than cards. So specifically, there are dice. This game actually, so when you're in combat, when mechs are in combat, or Efreets are in combat, you roll a die to see if you hit or not. Okay. So that's one thing that's a bit different when it comes to card-based games. Most don't do that. So this one, you actually roll a die to see if you hit. Different Efreets have different degrees of accuracy. There's abilities that can make it more or less likely to hit. Faster, generally lighter mechs are generally harder to hit. If you do hit them, however, they're more easily destroyed than heavier mechs, which are easier to hit, but they take a lot more damage. Additionally, one thing that's interesting about this, as I mentioned, there's 5 missions in the middle. And when you send your mechs there, what we're going to do is, for each of my Efreets, I'm going to take one of these dials, okay, which has the numbers 1 through 5, Okay, and I'm going to set it so the missions are numbered, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And let's say I'm going to send this Efreet to mission number 4. I'm going to set this to 4, put it face down there. You have no idea where I'm setting that mech as you're deciding where to put yours. Okay, once we've both done this, we will reveal our dials and place our Efreets at the appropriate missions to fight.
That sounds really good. Like you're trying to get in your opponent's mind to a certain degree.
Yeah.
Guess where they're going, which to me adds like just a great level of tactical activity to the game.
It's stressful.
Yeah.
It is stressful, I will tell you. Many a time where I've been there, oh man, I want to go for that mission, but I'm afraid he's going to send that Efreet there, and I do not want to face that one. That thing's a beast, and I think he's going to do that. So maybe I'll go to this mission. But then again, but I think you put the iocane powder in that one. Yeah. But knowing this, you probably put the iocane powder in front of me.
Yeah.
So, there's definitely mind games going on there. Absolutely. It's great.
Oh, that sounds great. So is there any type of record keeping that's really necessary? Like, any Battletech fan would say, is there heat? Is there ammunition? What's going on? Or is this kind of like incorporate that into how the decks are made or the dice are rolled?
So I'll tell you, and I know you're a huge Battletech fan. We've talked about that before. I love mechs. I love the world. However, I'm not a fan of the game because of that, all right? Because of the intensive bookkeeping required. REDLINE bypasses all that. The only thing I have to keep track of in REDLINE is the damage done to my Efreets. Now, and I realize you're doing that in Battletech as well, but it's much less in depth. It's simply each Efreet has an armor rating, and when it takes damage total damage equal to that armor rating, it's destroyed. All right, I'm just tracking the total damage you've put on it. Efreets typically have armor ratings from, some of your really small light mechs might have an armor rating of 2. All right, some of your really heavy Efreets could have an armor rating of, I want to say, I think 8 is the highest I've seen. So I'm just tracking the total damage you've done. So now there is one other minor bit of bookkeeping. I mentioned you're generating resources. They work just like lands, all right, in Magic. There's a secondary resource called Recon, okay? Recon is used for specified purposes in the game. There are certain cards that say spend this much Recon for this ability, all right? So a lot of card abilities are activated by Recon. And Recon is tracked by a 6-sided die. You can never have more than 6 Recon. So that's very minor bookkeeping there. Light Efreets are good at generating Recon. So.
Okay. So the mechs clearly looks like they have a degree of firing weapons, but they've also got big fists. So can I get stompy with these robots?
So as in melee combat?
Yes.
Ooh, that's a great question. So let me tell you, right now, no.
Okay.
All right. There's no melee combat among them. However, there is a Kickstarter coming up for the next expansion in REDLINE called Payday. And Payday, firstly, I will mention, this is a war between the Crimson Pact of Mars and the United Nations of Earth. Payday introduces 2 new factions. Okay, the Industrial faction, which is what it sounds like. It's corporate mining, and there's a Mercenary faction. All right, Mercenary faction, they take out contracts, right, on other Efreets and Efreet pilots. So in Payday, it will introduce melee combat.
Oh boy.
Yeah, it will introduce melee combat.
That sounds really cool. So is it just mechs, or do we have other supports like, tanks or infantry or aerospace type fighters?
Okay. Good question. Nothing like that at this point. There's nothing like that at this point. That's certainly, I've had discussions with the designer about this, and that's something that there's design space available for that in the future. But at this point, there isn't anything like that. There are certainly cards, support cards other than Efreets in a different way. As in mentioned before, there's equipment cards that you can use to augment the Efreets. There's pilots you can put on an Efreet to augment its abilities. And there's also tactics cards. Tactics cards work much like instants or sorceries in Magic. Okay, they have an effect, and then they go to your discard pile. One thing that's unique about tactics cards is they can be paid for by recon. So I mentioned that secondary resource.
Yeah.
Recon tactics are the only card that can be played using recon.
Okay, no, that sounds interesting. You mentioned dice. Are they normal? What sided dice are we looking at, and are they, for calculating the odds? Is it d6 1 to 6, or is it 2, 3, 6? How are the dice set up?
In combat, you use a d12. All right, so and it's a linear. It's not a bell curve or anything. It's linear, straight up d12. What it is, the way it works is your target has a certain speed rating. And you're going to roll d12, and you have to equal or exceed its speed rating to hit. If you roll less than speed, you miss. All right. If you hit, you do however much damage your Efreet does to that Efreet. If I go ahead and send Efreets to a mission, and you don't, it's unopposed, I can try and take control of that mission. Or if you do send Efreets to that mission, and we fight and I win, destroying your Efreets or forcing your Efreets to retreat, I can attempt to take control of that mission. Every mission has a capture cost. You roll a 6-sided die, and if you can equal or exceed the capture cost of that mission, you take control of that mission. And you place a control counter on that mission. Let's say I'm playing UNE, you're playing CPM. I take control of that mission, I put a UNE token on that mission. Okay. Now, in the future, let's say you want to try and take control of that mission. Any control token already on it increases the capture cost by 1. So it's going to be more difficult for you to take it from me if I've already taken it than if it's not been controlled already. Now, one thing that's interesting on that, I mentioned you roll a d6 to try and capture the mission. Each Efreet you have at that mission rolls a d6. So if I send 3 Efreets to that mission, I'm rolling 3d6. Right? And I just have to, in total, equal or exceed the capture cost. The capture costs typically range from 2 to 8. So now, light Efreets, each of them has -2 to the die roll.
Okay.
Each heavy Efreet has +2 to the die roll. So heavy Efreets are much better at taking control of missions than light Efreets.
So these missions, do they come from like a centralized deck that comes with the core set, or is it something that you could have in your own personal deck that we each bring a few to the table? Where do the missions come from?
Okay, well, the core set has a stack of missions. Comes with 20 different missions. Matter of fact, if you want that little stack of cards closer to you, those are the missions. That's the mission deck from the core set. Okay. Now, the expansions each add a few additional missions. All right, the missions are very different. You could play a game where the missions end up, so typically you'll randomly choose the 5 missions. You might end up with a game where the missions all have very low capture costs. That's going to give light Efreets a massive advantage because they can get there quickly.
Oh, wow.
And try and take those missions. Whereas for your opponent has more medium and heavy mechs, you might be able to take a lot of these before your opponent gets a chance to get their force going. Or you could end up with a bunch of missions that have very high capture costs, in which case light Efreets are going to have a really hard time taking those missions. And it's going to give the player who has a lot of heavy Efreets an advantage. So there's a lot of variability there. You can also choose 5 missions. The players can agree, let's go with these 5 missions and play this. And that can result in some really neat stories. Okay, so for example, you could Battle of Neon adds a bunch of missions that are unique to the city of Neon. You could play strictly with those. So we're recreating the Battle of Neon.
So it sounds like the theater war really heavily influences how the game will go, and it can be very different from game to game. Whereas one type of random selection of missions could, really benefit a light deck or a heavy deck, or really play well with a deck of a balanced deck that has a little bit of everything. So that sounds like you can have a lot of different types of games going, and really influences how you might create your deck or change it, and when you mix the different cards together.
Yeah, if you have an idea what the missions are going to be.
Right.
And that's the thing, you generally don't. Again, depending. You can certainly prearrange the 5 missions. But the core rules, it's generally randomly determined.
And is it just 1-on-1, or can you have, could it be 2-on-2 or 3 players? How many players can you have?
So they, Same Throw Studios has published a 3-player variant. I've never tried it myself, so I don't really know. I haven't tried it. It seems to me like it's really a game intended more for one.
Right.
Okay. It really, I think, would be optimally a one-on-one game. But I say that having never tried the 3-player variant. So, and which is one thing I got to say. I played a game where I started off just kind of screwed. I wasn't pulling the resources I needed. I was on a really hard time, and my opponent was really getting a strong leg up on me, and I did end up winning the game. That is so important to me. I hate games where the rich get richer. All right, once you pull ahead, one person behind, there's just no recovery. That is not the case with REDLINE, I found. It's certainly a game where you can end up behind and suddenly pull out a victory. Which is one thing I really appreciate on it. Another thing that popped in my head, we were talking about missions earlier, another thing I love. I mentioned taking the missions, taking all 5 missions is your primary path to victory. What's great though, the missions are not just that. Each mission has a certain ability on it that you will gain when you take control of that mission. Or some of them might have just abilities where if you send efforts to the mission. Like, for example, there's a mission where gain a recon if you send at least 1 effort to this mission. So that's one where both players tend to send efforts there because you want recon. It's additional resources you can use. It lets you do things in the game. So that's a mission that's going to attract battle. Okay, and again, there's others where you can send an effort there. If you take control of this mission, put a +1 speed counter on one of your efforts. So one of my efforts now had its speed increased, making it harder to hit because I took control. Because I took control of that mission. So taking control of the missions is very much a tactical decision as well. It's not just, I want to take all 5 of these missions. Ooh, I want that mission because I want what that's going to do for me. Okay, so which I think is great. It's not just, okay, I've got to take these missions because that's how I win the game. It's, no, I'm going to make a strategic decision to go ahead and go after this mission.
Okay, that sounds great. Are there any type of global effects like weather or anything you can do to kind of fundamentally change some aspect of the game?
No, nothing like that I've seen. Nothing like that I've seen at all. That does, trying to think. Yeah, no, I can't think of anything like that.
Okay. Well, what are the components do we have? I see some things behind there. We have dials for changing. We've got dice. Is there anything else that's involved? The playmats look to be just, aesthetic. But is there anything else you would need if you were going to go out and pick up this game besides these? It looks pretty self-contained.
If you were to pick up this here, the core set, you have everything you need to play REDLINE. Okay, it includes all the dice, a pair of 12-sided dice, which again are just used to determine if you hit your opponent or not, and 6-sided dice to go ahead and roll for your capture rolls to try and capture a mission or to track recon. Again, you're capped at a maximum of 6 recon, so you just use a 6-sided die for that. And it also, of course, comes with the dials, 5 for each player because there are 5 missions. We'd each need a set of 5.
So it sounds really interesting. I'd certainly like to get involved in the game of it if you could show me more.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be happy to teach you how to play.